Hello, I'm Karen Duncan, and today I want to talk to you about 4 strategies for community building in your classroom. So in this presentation, we'll first talk about the importance of classroom community, and then we'll look at how to personalize interactions with your students, develop classroom accountability, encourage empathy and kindness, and how to help students work towards a shared goal. At the end, we're going to reiterate that importance of classroom community. So after finishing this lecture, we'd like you to be able to explain the importance of building classroom community. Identify 4 main ways to build that community in your classroom. And we'd like you to be able to describe specific teaching applications for building classroom community. All right, when we think about the importance of classroom community, it usually starts with making connections. You start by making connections with your students and they're making connections with each other. After that, we build some trust with the teacher, with the students. And after building trust, this helps create a sense of belonging in the classroom. All of these steps help us build classroom community. And when we have that community in our classroom, the students feel more comfortable for speaking English, learning English, making mistakes in that classroom. Students also have more ownership over their learning if they feel like they're part of the community. Teachers often see a decrease in behavioral issues if there's a strong, tight-knit community in their classroom, and teachers can feel more fulfilled. It's much more enjoyable to be teaching to a classroom that has a strong community. So the first way to build classroom community that we're going to talk about today is to personalize interactions. That's one way to help you build community in your classroom. So let's talk about some different ways you can personalize those interactions. It sounds very simple, but it's really great to be intentional about addressing students by name. If you address them by their name, then everything feels more personal. Embrace get to know you activities. These are really great to do at the beginning of the course, but it's also fun to do them throughout the course and learn new things about each other. Make time for off-content communication. A lot of times we're sticking to our lesson plans. We want to focus on the content for the day and we want to get through it and make sure our students learn what our lesson aims have included. But it's also nice to take a few minutes every day for some off-content talk. So for example, at the very beginning of each class, you might talk about what you all did last weekend or what your plans are for the next weekend. This is pretty natural and most people are already doing this in their classrooms. So let's look at one specific teaching application for personalizing interactions. This is something that a teacher taught to me and I've used in the classroom ever since. So I have a very difficult time in memorizing student names. So in order to help me with that, a teacher gave me this tip. At the very beginning of class, at the beginning of your semester or your term, you could have your students create a name card. And then you collect those name cards. And when you're teaching, you'll mix up those cards every day so they're in a different order. When you want to ask the class a question, instead of asking students to raise their hands, which you can do sometimes, you could go through the cards and call the name on that card. So if my first card said Betsy, I can connect that name with the student who starts talking. That'll help me learn those students' names. The other benefits are that it randomizes student participation. So you have some students that are going to raise their hand all the time in class, and they might start to dominate classroom conversations. But if you use this name card method, it not only helps you memorize those students' names, but it also helps you make sure that all different students are speaking during class. You may have some students that feel shy about speaking up in class, but usually they get used to this method and they understand that at some point their name might be called during the class. Here's an example of what you might include on a name card on the front and the back. And you can adjust this based on the student level. When you think about this teaching application, some of you might be teaching online. So one way you could modify this for online learning is to digitalize it. If you're used to using Google Forms and Google Sheets, you could easily create a basic survey in Google Forms and with questions like name, preferred name, pronouns, hobbies, those types of things. Send the link to your students, they fill it out and you have their information. And then you can export that data to Google Sheets and then randomize the students' names with their information in Google Sheets at the beginning of each class so that you have the same idea, you just don't have those physical note cards. If you're not familiar with Google Forms and Google Sheets, there are some other apps that could help you do something like this, like Class Dojo or Team Shake. All right, the second way to develop classroom community that I'd like to talk about is when we help develop classroom accountability. Some different ways to develop classroom accountability. Well, we create classroom rules and expectations for our students, but they help us do that as a group. They help us create those expectations and they feel part of that exercise. You could also assign classroom roles and duties, and this helps students feel like they're accountable for their actions and what they contribute to the classroom. You might have students work on their personal learning goals, and then you check back on those goals periodically. So you're holding students accountable for their own learning in that way. So one idea for a teaching application is to assign students jobs and roles at the very beginning of your time with them. You could, at the very beginning, you could describe and model those jobs and chores. It might take you about a week to model all those different jobs, describe them. Depending on the level, it might take you longer. And then you could slowly have the students take over these jobs throughout your term. You could create a system to alternate who is assigned to which duty on which week, for example. There are a lot of benefits to doing this. The learners feel more ownership over their own learning and their role in the classroom. The students feel like they're part of a team and they're working together as a group. This really lessens the burden on the teacher. So we have some examples here: calendar helper, weather helper, board eraser, paper passer, paper collector. So for the teacher, instead of thinking, oh, I need to write up the date and the weather every day so we can talk about it, you have a student in charge of that. That lessens the burden on you. If you're teaching online, an easy modification would be just to modify the types of jobs that you're giving students. You might have an attendance clerk to help you take attendance in your Zoom room, or a chat moderator, somebody to help locate or identify chats that might not be conducive to learning. A virtual assistant, a timekeeper, someone to help you know when it's time to stop the lesson, or breakout room leaders. That can be really helpful because as the teacher, you can't be present in all the different breakout rooms. You can go in between them, but it's different from being in the classroom when you can see all the different groups working together at the same time. Another way to create classroom community is to encourage empathy and kindness throughout your time with your students. Here are some different ways you might do that. You could emphasize friendship and teamwork in a lot of different activities that you have going on in your class. You could also, as the teacher, model and encourage random acts of kindness and even just giving compliments to each other. You might have students engage in a compliment circle. They sit in a circle. This helps a lot even with younger students who are used to sitting in a circle. They sit down at the very beginning. They compliment each other on something. So they're being kind and empathetic to their other classmates. Here's one teaching application, an idea of something you could do in the classroom to help create classroom community. You might do something like this paying compliments activity that I'm going to show you. So with this activity, you're going to model giving compliments as an everyday act. You'll do that in your class with your students. You can teach your students how to give compliments in the target language, so in English. Then you could have them practice with this type of activity that I'm going to show you. All right, with this paying compliments activity, you could first review how to give compliments in the class. So you might display sentence stems like this on the board. I like your, I like how you, I like it when you. These types of sentence stems can help students, especially at lower levels, feel more confident in this type of activity. You could also show them examples of how you respond to compliments. Thank you. That's so kind of you to say. Thanks. I really appreciate it. And then you could have cards like these. These are just some examples. Tell me something nice about my handwriting or pronunciation. Say something nice about my clothes. Say something nice about my attitude. A lot of these, I usually go for compliments that are geared more towards English and the way people act versus the way they look. So with these types of cards, you could cut them up and you could tape one on each student's back. And then you could have students walk around the room and they can look at the student's back and read each other's cards. And then they could give the student a compliment based on what is on their back. You could do this a few different times by taking off the cards and switching them around. This is practicing English, but it is also practicing kindness and creating classroom community. So with this type of activity, the learners are practicing their speaking skills and showing kindness. Learners feel that kindness and encouragement can be a normal part of the class. They might not feel embarrassed to give compliments if you show that it can be an everyday thing that they do in the classroom. If you want to modify this for the online setting, you might do the same type of thing, but do it in breakout rooms with students. You could separate students into different breakout rooms and then give each group one of the cards, and they're going to practice with that paying compliments activity. After a few minutes, you can give different cards to different groups or chat those different phrases to different groups. If you have fewer students, you don't have a lot of students to create groups, you might use like an interactive whiteboard where the students can practice writing compliments to each other. One example of an interactive whiteboard is Padlet.com. All right, another way we can try to create classroom community is to have the class work towards a shared goal. So here are some different ideas. You could enlist the class in creating classroom rules and in agreements. That's one way that they're working towards a shared goal. We talked about this earlier in the lecture, but in this way, they're working in a group and their goal is to finalize those classroom rules and agreements. You might implement small weekly challenges for your students. So you have very small goals that they're working towards together. Or you might create a really long-term challenge with a class reward for your students. One idea of how to apply this in the classroom is to implement those weekly challenges that we were just talking about. So let's say you have a challenge like you want your students to memorize a poem and recite it together, or you want your students to challenge themselves to make sure by the end of each day for a week that the classroom floor is clean. We don't have to spend time cleaning up at the end of the day. So you're going to set up that challenge with your students, whatever it might be, and you challenge them to work together to work towards this goal. When the goal is reached by the end of the week, then you might give your class a small reward. Maybe they get to watch a movie together, they get no homework that night, something like that. You can do this multiple times. And then after you do this a lot, you might have your students contribute ideas for these challenges. This can help them feel even more ownership over working towards these goals. So some benefits of this type of teaching application is that learners build relationships while working together, and they feel empowered when that challenge is met at the end of the week. One way you might modify this for an online setting is to use an app like Goose Chase. With the Goose Chase app, you can set up an asynchronous scavenger hunt for your students. So you might have them looking for different things in their house. So you could have a scavenger hunt where they have to perform different things or say different things to different people. You could have your students sign up for this app. You could explain the challenge to them. And then you track their progress through the app, and you can reward the class when the scavenger hunt has been completed. All right, let's go back to this idea that we started this lecture with. We really want to focus on this importance of classroom community, because remember, we can start by building connections, then we build trust with each other, we create a sense of belonging in the classroom, and then students and teachers benefit from this classroom community. All right, thank you for joining me in this lecture today. I hope that you have come away with some ideas of how you can apply these different techniques of building classroom community in your own classroom.